Hello to our invisible audience. Welcome to this joint Royal Society of Literature King's College London event on careers in literature. We're going to be talking a bit about the variety of careers it's possible to make for yourself in the literary world, how you might go about making such a career, and what it's like to do some of these jobs yourself. My name is Edmund Gordon. I'm a senior lecturer in creative writing at King's and a fellow of the Royal Society of Literature. And I'm going to begin by introducing our brilliant and distinguished panel of speakers, who between them range across the worlds of publishing, agenting, events programming, marketing, writing, and editing. Sarah Such has worked in publishing for over 30 years, holding senior positions across editorial, marketing, and press. She began her career in 1990 at Random House in the children's division, moving to Chatto & Windus as press officer, then marketing and publicity manager. She was appointed publicity manager at Penguin Books, becoming head of publicity, and ultimately publicity director of Penguin UK with corporate responsibilities. She later joined Fourth Estate as commissioning editor, becoming senior editor at Hodder and Stoughton and editorial director of Duckworth Publishers. She founded the Sarah Such Literary Agency in 2007, since when she's been shortlisted 3 times for Literary Agent of the Year at the Book Industry Awards 2017, 2014, and 2013. Bea Colley is a freelance literature programmer and producer. She has worked in the literature sector for over 15 years, supporting writers in their careers and programming and producing literature and poetry festivals. She worked at South Bank Centre in London for 10 years, where she set up numerous projects alongside underrepresented writers, and has also worked at the Poetry Society and the Reader Organisation. She has strong connections with many of the UK's literature development agencies and was co-chair of New Writing South until 2020. A poem from Rishi Dastar's debut, Ticker Tape, was included in the Forward Book of Poetry 2018. A second book, Saffron Jack, was published in 2020, and he's editor of The Craft, a guide to making poetry happen in the 21st century. His third collection, Neptune's Projects, will be published by Nine Arches Press in May 2023. He is also co-editor of Too Young, Too Loud, Too Different, Poems from Malika's Poetry Kitchen, which is published by Corsair. Sana Goyal is Wasafiri's, sorry Sana, I should have asked you how to pronounce Wasafiri. Is it Wasafiri, Wasafiri?
Wasafiri.
Wasafiri, thank you. Is Wasafiri's deputy and reviews editor. Formerly the publicity manager at Titled Access Press and the digital editor at Wasafiri, she now does marketing and outreach at Poetry Birmingham Literary Journal. She has a PhD in literary prizes from SOAS, University of London. Her work has appeared in The Guardian, the Los Angeles Review of Books, the TLS, Poetry London, PBLJ, Brixton Review of Books, Vogue India, and elsewhere. She lives between Birmingham and Bombay. Thank you and welcome to all of you. So I think each of the panelists is going to speak for a few minutes about their own careers. Then we'll open it up for a wider discussion, which I will lead for half an hour or so. And finally, we will open things up to you, the audience, and there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions, which you can put in the Q&A box, which you should be able to find somewhere on your screens. So Bea, if I could please ask you to begin by introducing yourself.
Thank you, Edmund. So hello, everybody. My name is Bea Colley. So I grew up in Darlington, which is in the northeast. I'm really lucky to have a mum who writes poetry. So she took me to see poets from a very young age performing all over the northeast. I remember seeing Linton Kwesi Johnson when I was about 13 at a Middlesbrough. It was a sort of Middlesbrough town hall or a Middlesbrough working men's group. And I kind of thought, wow, this is incredible. I didn't imagine that poetry could be so inspiring and so wonderful. I sort of took a year out before I went to university because I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. And I ended up working in a shoe shop in the indoor market in Darlington. And at the same time, I started to get the train once a week to Durham, which was about 20 minutes away, and work on Durham Literature Festival. So I was volunteering at the time. And I did everything from stuffing envelopes to running the bookshop at the festival. And when I was sort of thinking back to the things that inspired me in my career, I realised there have been lots of amazing women that have supported me. So the director of Durham Lit Fest would invite me out on the dinners that she went on after the events with some of these incredible writers. And, you know, I was so shy that I probably barely spoke at these dinners, but I just thought that was such a generous act of inclusion of the director. So I went to university. I moved around a little bit when I came back. So I worked at Darlington Arts Centre, then at the Reader Organisation for 3 years, which is based in Liverpool, where I ran reading groups in hospitals, care homes, refugee centres. And I really saw then the power that stories and poems have to bring people together. I moved to London and became an education manager at the Poetry Society. And then I moved to the South Bank Centre, where I worked for around 10 years. So that's sort of the biggest chunk of my career to date. At first, I was a participation producer for literature. So I worked on the centre's free festival programme. And we did Poetry Parnassus, which was the largest poetry festival to ever happen in the UK, where somehow we gained permission to rain 100,000 poems of peace from a helicopter over the South Bank Centre, which was quite a bonkers project. And I'm not sure if we get permission to do it again, but it was a very, very special project and made me think about the power of poetry in unexpected ways. So then I moved into a different role at the South Bank Centre. I worked as a literature programmer and worked on the ticketed programme there. And, you know, standing on the stage at Royal Festival Hall and introducing writers such as Roxane Gay, Maggie Nelson, Khaled Hosseini is really something that I never imagined that I would do in my life. So I'll always be really grateful of the support of others in the literature sector as I was sort of going through my different roles. And, you know, I think something that's been really important for me throughout my time at the Reader Organisation, the Poetry Society and South Bank Centre has been building relationships with brilliant partner organisations. So literature development agencies like New Writing North, New Writing South, Spread the Word, and many others that exist around the UK, to literature festivals and organisations. And it was absolutely this network of literature organisations that I called upon when I was made redundant in the pandemic years. I found myself in quite a strange place, as I'm sure many others did. And I decided to set myself up as a freelancer, and I reached out to this network of organisations that I'd sort of been working with over the last 10 to 15 years. And, you know, it felt like the sector really supported me at that point. And the last 2.5 years, I've been freelance, working as a programmer and a producer in the literature sector. I've worked on poetry and public art projects with Poet in the City, on events and conference programming for the National Association of Writers in Education. And I've programmed authors, poets and speakers for festivals such as Women of the World, Prima Donna and Brighton Festival. So, you know, I'd say going freelance, it was a really scary and unexpected prospect for me, you know, especially for someone who has always relied on the safety net of a salary at the end of each month. But there are so many wonderful organisations like Royal Society of Literature, National Association of Writers in Education, and other regional development agencies that can support you with practical aspects of becoming freelance, as well as offering different trainee programmes. So, for example, Poet in the City has a brilliant emerging producers programme that you should check out if you're interested. I would say there's definitely there's the need and the space for more freelancers working in this sector. And I hope that I can offer the support to people hoping for a career in literature that so many others did for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bea. That was fascinating. Plenty to pick up on. Please, can I ask Sana to introduce herself now?
Thanks, Edmund, for that introduction. I'm really pleased to be here. And thank you, Bea, for telling us about your journey, and particularly for that image of raining poetry. I think that's a really beautiful way to start the event. I was born in Bombay. I moved to the UK at the age of 18 or 19 to do my undergraduate studies at the University of York. It was a 3-year program. After I finished, I was kind of like, after I graduated, I wasn't sure if I wanted to kind of go into postgraduate studies immediately or kind of take some time. And I was confused if I wanted to kind of do post-colonial studies or creative writing. So I kind of moved back to Mumbai actually for a year. And I did an internship at the features department at Vogue India, which was less glamorous than it sounds, and was writing about books and culture and doing all sorts of things and sending lots of emails. And yeah, and then I briefly worked as a copy editor for the website. And while I was doing this, I applied for various master's programs back in the UK again, and started my master's in post-colonial studies at SOAS, University of London. While I was doing this master's, I was kind of very much sort of really like happy to be back in academia and enjoying, studying and learning and writing essays. And so I kind of applied to do a PhD at SOAS as well. So it was while doing this PhD at SOAS that I applied and got accepted for a year-long Chase editorial and administrative placement at Wasafiri magazine. So Chase is the Consortium for the Humanities and the Arts, Southeast England, for those of you who don't know. It was a really exciting time to be at Wasafiri, this magazine of international contemporary writing, which was just turning 35 that year, and founded in 1984 by Dr. Sushila Nasta. Halfway through the internship, I made the role of digital editor, which I remained in for about 18 months. I was commissioning and editing for the website, managing the magazine's social media platforms. And then I took a break to finish my thesis, which was on the politics and ethics of literary prizes, looking at the 50th anniversary of the Booker Prize and the 20th anniversary of the Cain Prize for African Writing. During the PhD, which was delayed due to the pandemic, I was kind of feeling like I was in a bit of a limbo and like the PhD was going on for too long, which those of you who've done a PhD will know happens. And I was looking at kind of ways to fill my time a little bit more. And I started working part-time as a publicist for a year at Tilted Access Press, a small press publishing translations from Asian languages, including last year's International Booker Prize winner. And since last year at Poetry Birmingham Literary Journal, which is a biannual magazine of poetry and poetry criticism, doing some marketing and outreach work for them. Over the years and like kind of alongside the PhD, I've also been a freelancer, like kind of writing about books and prizes for a number of publications. I've had the wonderful opportunity of judging some prizes, including the Orwell Prize for Political Fiction and English Pen's Pen Presents Award for translations, and done live events with authors, including book launches. I returned to Wasafiri last spring as deputy and reviews editor after finishing my PhD. At the magazine, I edit the spring issue each year, which has just come out, by the way, for anyone who wants to check it out. Commissioned for the website and contribute to kind of everything from editorial to events and alongside broader organizational strategy and vision. So I think talking about my career, I think it sounds quite bitty and it sounds like lots of little things, but I've always kind of enjoyed doing that. I've really particularly enjoyed being on sort of both sides of the publishing process, pitching reviews, but also commissioning them and things like that. And I was really happy to kind of, I was in the space where doing my PhD, thinking about like my future and like realizing that academia was maybe not the right space for me. So working with an organization like Wasafiri, which is kind of creative, critical, and sort of academia adjacent, I found that really lovely sweet spot that I enjoy, kind of working at the intersection of academia and journalism. So I think I'll stop here and very happy to take any questions, and I'll pass on to the next speaker. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sana. Next, Sarah.
Hi there, it's fascinating. My name is Sarah Such, I'm a literary agent, and I'm really delighted to be part of this event. I've worked in publishing for over 30 years and been fortunate to work with extraordinary writers and amongst colleagues who love reading more than anything. I opened my literary agency in 2007 to accommodate my broad taste in books, including literary and commercial fiction and non-fiction, YA and some children's books, and also to be my own boss. Authors my agency represents include Caroline Sanderson, Associate Editor of The Bookseller, Jeffrey Boachi, author of I Heard What You Said, an Amazon non-fiction book of the year of 2022, Anne Charnock, winner of the Arthur C. Clarke Award, and Anthony Johnston, creator of Atomic Blonde, the forthcoming Dog Sitter Detective series, and vice chair of the Crime Writers Association. I look for writers with originality, with a particular focus on debut novels, non-fiction, memoir, biography, popular culture, and diversity, and on building long-term careers, often with writers who write both fiction and non-fiction. As a literary agent, I work with writers at the earliest manuscript stage to ready their work to submit to publishers, clinching the best deals I can for them, as well as negotiating publishing contracts. Being one of the first to read a manuscript remains one of the most exciting aspects of my role. I'm editing manuscripts now that won't be published until 2024. I grew up in Northumberland in the Northeast, and the first book event I went to was the Literary Festival in Newcastle to see poets James Fenton and Stephen Spender reading in a church overlooking the Tyne. Never forgot it. I went to Paris after A-levels, where I tried to get a job selling books in Shakespeare and Company, but they didn't want me. So I cleaned toilets in a Burger King in the Champs-Élysées and learned French, then read English and philosophy at Leeds University. Each job I've done in publishing has been informed by my interests and my past experiences. Everything has added toward my career, I would say. My first job was temping, which was competitively paid casual work at the time in what was then Random House sales department in Bedford Square. I learned how the sales system worked to fulfill orders to the bookshops, a training which has never left me. It's an integral part of the publishing industry. It led to a full-time job as a publicity and marketing assistant in children's, in launching a new children's paperback imprint, Red Fox, and working for then Random House Children's Books. I interviewed a few years later, once I was working in the publisher, for a press officer job at Chatto & Windus under Virago founder and publisher, the late Carmen Khalil, publishing author titles, writing press releases, dealing with the press, and producing marketing material. I'd read most of Virago's list as it was stocked in Thorns in Newcastle. I had a philosophy degree and was a Francophile, which I think really led to my getting the job, the combination, and to working on press campaigns such as Iris Murdoch's philosophy opus, Metaphysics as a Guide to Morals, and later as publicity manager on Edmund White's major Jean Genet biography. Working on Toni Morrison's anthology about race and gender and a UK tour remain one of the most memorable of my publishing career to date. I used to walk past the then Penguin offices on the King's Road and longed to work there. It really seemed unimaginable. But my work at Chatto got me noticed, and I joined Penguin as publicity manager, managing a department and becoming publicity director at a really exciting time for paperbacks. I worked on the world's ever first ebook, the Penguin 60th anniversary, and the relaunch of the renowned Penguin poetry series I'd studied at university, and with such great writers as Pat Barker and Laurie Lee. I then moved across to editorial, working as commissioning editor at Fourth Estate, then senior editor at Hodder and Stoughton, and editorial director at Duckworth, commissioning literary and commercial titles. Being an editor is a different type of job. You're finding books to publish, working with an author at the beginning of the publishing cycle. The role of an editor is detailed and focused on text. A commissioning editor also needs a sense of markets and readerships, presenting books at acquisition meetings, commissioning covers, costing books, and presenting to sales forces are all part of the role. All these experiences, learning the machinery of the publishing process, how to edit, publicize, and market books, and crucially learning how to trust my editorial judgment, informs the way I do work as a literary agent today.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And finally, Rishi.
Thanks, Edmund, and good evening, everyone. As compared to what you've heard, my way through to where I am now is a lot more higgledy-piggledy and not especially straightforward. I knew from the age of 14 that I wanted to write in some way, but I had no idea what way, shape, or form that might take. So I went off to university and gravitated towards doing journalism, student journalism there. Did a lot of that, and then ended up doing a little bit of journalism after I graduated. Found that I wasn't especially good at that, shall we say, and went off to do my master's at the LSE, which I now suddenly realise I probably shouldn't say in a room full of King's students. And while I was up the road, I discovered this whole area of life called branding, corporate branding, which seemed like a very interesting way to spend my time. So I went off up to Milton Keynes, of all places, and got a job in an agency up there where I was a junior writer in an agency where I was writing customer letters, bills and statements and messages for brands that went onto that. But I quickly moved down to London and started to do more strategic stuff and what have you. And all the way through, I was still wanting to do writing and copywriting. So I was doing that in the evenings, putting a book together, what have you. And it was about 2007 or so, I got a break and ended up at an ad agency where I was able to suddenly start writing ads, and that's amazing. And at that same time, that same year, actually, I discovered poetry because I hadn't studied literature at all up until that point. And I discovered that, wow, actually, all of the things that I'd been trying to write up until that point, this is the thing that I'd been actually been seeking out and wanting to do. And so from that point onwards, I've had what I describe as parallel careers, a phrase that I shamelessly stolen from the football journalist and musician Philippe Auclair. I spend a good chunk of my time in the branding and advertising world, and I spend a good chunk of my time in the poetry and literature world. And we could probably get into degrees of commitment and levels of success within either. But what that really means is that I get to spend 6 days a week thinking about writing and words in one way, shape, form, or other, for different paymasters, for different audiences, and with various different outcomes and effects. What it has meant is a series of adventures in lots of grand and differing ways. On the commercial side of things, it means that I've been able to write for brands as big and famous as O2, Sky, Barclays, Spotify. And there's something quite clarifying when the client tells you that a particular thing that you're working on is going out to 10 million people. So could you please not make any mistakes? On the other side, doing the poetry, discovering that I might be, have some facility to do that has meant that I've been able to have adventures like reading at various festivals, going on tour with the British Council out to Berlin, making documentaries for Radio 4, reviewing things for The Guardian, putting my own words out into the world, mentoring other poets, being a trustee of various organisations. And so I think, as part of a literary career, giving back to the organisations that nurture the ecosystem is important as well. Judging prizes too, I've done a bit of in the last couple of years as well. But all of those connected just by that simple desire and ambition that I had as a 14-year-old to just write.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all of you. That was fascinating. One thing that strikes me about all of your career paths today is that none of you sort of intended at the beginning of your careers to end up precisely where you are. There's been, if you are doing the kind of thing that you started out doing, you've done other things along the way. You've all moved between sort of different kind of literary jobs along the way. And I suppose my first question to all of you is how important it is, if making a literary career for yourself, to be open to doing things which are not necessarily your primary interest, and how easy it is to move between different parts of the literary world. Sarah, if I could put that to you, first of all.
Yes, I think when I first started in publishing, if you were female, you had to type, really, I'm afraid. And there were a few sort of jobs where you could go straight in, sort of, start commissioning or whatever, but it was very rare. And you really had to sort of start, at the bottom, like a lot of jobs. I would say to anyone watching this who's sort of interested in working in publishing, I don't think there's been a more interesting time to join. I think it is opening up, I really do. And I would encourage you to really get involved. You've got London Book Fairs coming up 18th to the 20th of April. And that has over 100 free seminars that you can go to. I think news magazines like Wasafiri are amazing. All the events that Bee's doing, all the poetry events. I think it's a really, really exciting time to get involved with book publishing. And I certainly, over the years, I've employed people I've met at London Book Fair. It's a very, very good way of kind of get your foot in the door, is what I would say to you. And don't just focus on being an editor or being a publicist. If there's other jobs that are coming up that have an interest to you, just get into the system. And I do think that you can see from my career and talk to most people who work in book publishing, in traditional book publishing, and they'll all have moved around. You get in there and start your career from that point.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Sana, you began with an internship at Vogue India, I think you said. How important is that kind of thing, do you think, for getting into the system, as Sarah puts it, getting your foot in the door?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was the kind of only, I had no previous work experience at that point in the industry, as it were, and it didn't seem like a very kind of obvious route to take, working at a fashion magazine after a literature degree, where I had this kind of post-colonial bent to my sort of research, and but it taught me a lot of really valuable skills around kind of entry-level job, these kind of placements and internships. I think are really important, and a lot of them are kind of tailored now more so to very specific projects, or working with archives, or they give you a sense of kind of what an organization looks like and how big and small organizations work. So even with Wasafiri and joining as a Chase placement student intern, it was really, I was doing all sorts of things within 6 months. I got really lucky and I was working as digital editor. But I remember in my first week at Wasafiri, I was, transcribing a 5,000 word interview, and that was amazing. I didn't realize that's what I think that idea of what an internship is has changed so much over the years. And I think for me personally, it was very much at some point realizing academia is not the route for me, and kind of really being open to what it is that I enjoy doing. And I think, like Sarah said, getting into the industry, being open to these options is really good. And I think for me personally, finding organizations where my kind of politics and ethics align with the organization, working at organizations which are sort of applying pressure on the mainstream has always kind of been really interesting to me. So I think it's about finding that space for yourself within the industry, whatever it is that, if it's writing or editing or, being a publicist or an agent. I think it's about trying out these different options. And I think those roles are quite not malleable necessarily, but there is something a bit flexible and open about these roles as well. You have to have your finger on the pulse, you have to be immersed and kind of embedded in the industry to kind of do any of these roles. And yeah, I think that's really important.
Can I just, for students or for people who've maybe just graduated, who are just sort of surveying what is a vast and bewildering industry, how would you go about identifying organizations whose politics and ethics might align with yours? I mean, if you just see a sort of list of jobs on the bookseller, how would you know anything about these places?
I think that's a really good question. I think a lot of small organizations, a lot of kind of, we've seen this kind of small press boom in the industry in the last few years, literary magazine culture. I think personally for me, those are the organizations I look to. I think it's really easily reflected in their masthead. It's reflected in the kind of work they're producing. It's about kind of looking to organizations that are willing to take a stance and to speak up, and it's about also realizing that there are organizations that have there is a sense of like false tokenism and, like a kind of agenda towards like diversity and inclusion that may not always be genuine. And I think it's about navigating that. I don't think there's any clear-cut or easy answers to that. I think it's about, being learning as you go along and kind of,
Thank you. I would like to, both of you so far have raised the question of diversity. I would like to return to that and ask you more about the extent to which the publishing world and the book world in general is changing, is moving in the right direction. But in the meantime, B, you said that one of your earliest jobs was at the Durham Literary Festival, and you mentioned the director of the festival who took you out and really sort of spent time talking to you and helped you on with your career. I mean, how important was it for you personally, and also more generally, how important is it, do you think, to have sort of a figure who's somewhat higher up the food chain who sort of helps you directly?
Yeah, well, I think sometimes from the outside it can look like the literary world is quite sort of close-knit, and I suppose that's because actually maybe it is close-knit in a way that, we are there are lots of generous people working in literature organizations. There's a real community, and that spans across kind of, literature festivals, literature organizations, publishers, small presses, large presses, that there really is a community there. And I think that once you have managed to find your way into it, there are lots of different routes that you can take and lots of different sort of support schemes that you can rely on. I mean, I was really lucky that that Alison took me out for dinner with these amazing writers, and I was sort of just awestruck because I couldn't believe that she had placed so much value in me being part of the team when I was really young. I was probably like 19 years old, and sort of really nervous about finding my way in that space. There are so many literature people who, as we can just see from this call, who went through a sense of being unsure about what they wanted to do with their lives and how they would find their ways into the sector. And I think, you can drop people messages on Twitter, you can look them up on LinkedIn. If there's a literature festival or a really brilliant initiative that you like the look of, do write to them, because these teams are often quite small, and although they are quite overstretched, they know how hard it can be to try and find your way into the industry. And so there are lots of generous people, and they're keen to support new and upcoming generations of people in the sector. So I would say just reach out and give it a go. And there are so many amazing, in my sphere, so many amazing new literature festivals, literature organizations that don't have to conform to a sort of traditional sense of what you think a literary festival might be. Do your research, see what excites you, and just get in touch with them and see what happens.
Thank you. Just one follow-up question about that. I noticed that you said you moved to London shortly after that. Did you feel that was a necessary move for you to make in terms of your career? I mean, did you feel that London was where the sort of literary careers were being made, and that it wouldn't have been easy for you to stay in the north?
Yeah, right. I sort of did a step in between. So I went to Liverpool in between sort of, doing work in Darlington, the northeast, then going on to Liverpool, where there's a really vibrant literary community. The Reader organisation runs incredible reading groups all over the city. And there's also the Writing on the Wall festival there. And it's just got a really fantastic literature scene there, as well as in Manchester. I sort of saw the job at the Poetry Society and I applied for it. I didn't think I would get it. but I did end up getting it. I think I would have been happy to stay in Liverpool and to enjoy that literary scene. You know, I think there is more choice in London, but again, I think that's changing now. I think there are more and more brilliant literature development agencies. New Writing North, based in Newcastle, have so much opportunity. And they're also kind of, so I'm working for Poet in the City at the moment, and they have project workers in Exeter and in Newcastle. So there are also lots of sort of brilliant London-based organisations doing things out around the UK. So I think things have changed a bit now. And I don't think London is the centre of the universe. I think there's lots out there.
And so it was a specific job then that you moved for, rather than a sense of a sort of literary ecology.
Yeah, it was a poetry job that I saw, and I thought, go on then, I'll give it a go, and I did get it. So, and that was a whole new adventure, you know. But yeah, sort of at that point, I was again quite young and quite excited to follow the paths that were opening up to me. And yeah, again, didn't think I would get the job. I gave it a go and I did. So I think it's worth trying sometimes. Thank you.
And Rishi, you moved from London to Milton Keynes, although not for a literary job, for a marketing job. And this great phrase, which you fessed up to not original, not but parallel careers. So do you think, I mean, are parallel careers increasingly common, do you think, in the literary world? I mean, especially among writers having other jobs. I mean, I suppose yours is sort of, your parallel careers, there's really something quite outside literature and something very embedded in literature.
I've made it work for me. I think it's reasonable to say as well. But on the basis of having that very simplistic, very reductive view that my tools are words and I'm using them 6 days a week, it just so happens that for a number of those days, the people who I'm selling the words to might not necessarily appreciate literary quality as much as those of us in the room tonight. That said, I do, I view it as an opportunity as well to try and raise the quality of copy that might be produced by various corporations and businesses. Knowing how much of that language shapes our wider discourse and our wider society. It doesn't seem an unreasonable ambition to try and make that as good as it can be. In terms of the parallel careers stuff, I think it's definitely a thing that you're seeing more and more people embrace and also have to embrace. And I guess to a greater or lesser degree of, being fluid about talking about it, being fluid about thinking about it, because right now, and not to surprise or disappoint anyone in the room, but you're highly unlikely to make the entirety of your living just off copies of books that you sell. So knowing that straight from the off, that you're going to have to be doing other things around whatever it is that you define as the core thing it is that you do. And so I certainly can point to peers, colleagues, friends who have written memoirs, who've written novels, but are also doing commercial copywriting, doing that freelance, maybe doing that at agencies, but are also speaking at conferences, are also doing consultancy jobs, sometimes literary consultancy, sometimes PR consultancy, sometimes that's literary PR, sometimes that's other things, but building up that broad portfolio of different activities, some of which are closer into whatever their passion might be, and some which are further away. I suspect I'm rarer in the sense of being so public and open about the fact that I make the majority of my money in something that is, to degrees away from literature. But I think it's important to do that in part because of diversity. I know we're going to talk about diversity within literature as well, but within that world of marketing and advertising, it is still not especially diverse at senior levels. And so I hope that being publicly visible as a person of color who is copywriting and doing brand strategy in the industry means that other people who are thinking about it go, okay, this may be a space for me as well. And I think that greater, visibility that you can, that you can offer to people, whatever it is that you choose to do, is an important part of both, helping to bring people through, but also just as a way of operating yourself as you work through your career. I think all four of us have touched on the fact that it is through open hands and generous offers and unexpected moments of kindness that we've all progressed, and it's important to to pay that back as much as possible.
Thank you. Since you returned to the diversity question, I'd like to follow up, because it sounds like you think that, I mean, maybe I'm wrong about this, but like you feel that the marketing world is in worse shape than the literary world. Is that correct?
It's a nuanced picture, and entry-level jobs, at graduate level jobs, and progressing to sort of like early to senior management level jobs, it's getting better. But I think there is a definite case of a drop-off after that point. And so if anyone is interested in this area, if you sign up to one of the campaign emails, Campaign is the advertising trade newspaper, and they send a daily email of who's moved where, who's won what accounts, whatever. And if you just look at the thumbnail pictures that accompany those stories, maybe it's one non-white face every 4 or 5 days in a newsletter of about 10, 15 stories. And I use that as a rule of thumb to suggest that there are that there are still gaps within that sector.
Sorry, what's your impression of the publishing world as?
It is a lot better, I would say, and in part because there has been both concerted thought and concerted effort and money put into making it better. And we shouldn't actually underestimate the fact that that has been the case for a long while now. I mean, if I give one concrete example, my career as a poet was aided immeasurably by the Complete Works, which was an Arts Council England funded development programme that identified 10 poets of Black and Asian background who were working in the UK. And it was set up by Bernardine Evaristo, who in 2005 wrote a report for the Arts Council that found that of the poetry collections published up until that point in the UK, only 1% of them were by poets of colour. And so, the programme was designed as a direct intervention to change that and make the pipeline towards publication bigger through targeted mentoring, professional development, craft development skills, and so on and so forth. And that's just one example of a range of different activities and programs that the sector has been very good at in terms of both identifying as issues and then working towards trying to solve them. Certainly during the period that I've been in the I've been in the world, and that's a very definite change. Of course, there's plenty more to be done, especially when we think about issues around the deaf, disabled, and thinking about bringing through people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds as well into the industry. So it's not to say that there aren't lacunas, but in comparison with where I spend a lot of my other time, this is a, shall we say, a beacon of progress, if not a fully finished article yet.
Thank you. Sarah, you hinted that was your view as well, I think, in your earlier. You also mentioned the changes that you've seen in terms of gender diversity, or in terms of certainly women attaining sort of top jobs in publishing over your time in the industry. I mean, there are these studies which come out and which suggest that there's still a fair distance to go in terms of certainly in sort of ethnic diversity in the publishing world. I think gender diversity seems to be, I think there are more women than men working in publishing now, but there's still a pay gap among people at the top. Is that right?
100 questions all in one. When I first came into publishing, there were a similar amount of women. I was very, very lucky to work with formidable women who were really helpful. I mean, one of my bosses had been a former psychiatric nurse. You often find people are attracted to publishing industry because they love reading. I mean, this is the central point about anyone who works in publishing or writes, and it's something that every now and again, if you kind of like tempted to go and do something else, you're sort of drawn back to that. It is, and obviously the importance of words and the importance of literature in terms of the world, in terms of politics, in terms of journalism. So working for someone like Carmen Khalil, who was a sort of major feminist of her time, obviously is very different to maybe someone that you'd work with now. But so I felt, you know, at the time, and then you had Gail Rebuck, who was CEO of Random House, Random Century. I also worked for Victoria Barnsley at Fourth Estate. So I worked for some really formidable women. There have been obviously a lot of great movements, but then you had a sudden change a few years ago when lots of CEOs who had been women, you know, sort of were replaced with men. So it's a constant battle, quite clearly, in the industry. I think something I find very exciting about now, the sort of younger people coming into the industry, is the power of the smaller independents is just remarkable. When I was first in publishing, you really wouldn't have had tiny imprints, as many tiny imprints contributing to literature in the way that they are now. And international, but I read Fitzgeraldo editions having all of those sort of long lists on the international booker. Influx Press, one of my authors is Kit Kalis. He's a remarkable writer. He's also a remarkable publisher. People are working in different ways. I mean, he's actually just returned to do an MA because of a subject he's so fascinated in. So I'd really encourage anyone watching this to sort of don't feel locked in. You know, if you want to go traveling for a year, do that. Come back with what you've learned from that and introduce it to the publishing world. Every single thing will feed into that. And I think gender equality, racial equality, it's an ongoing thing. It's an ongoing battle. And it's really important to have a wide variety of people coming into this industry. And I personally feel that is really happening, and I think there's a lot that can be done still. I mean, when I first, as I said, when I first started publishing, you had temping, which meant that actually you could go and be paid really quite well to do temporary jobs. So internships and so forth are incredibly important, but it always comes down to paying people for their work, and it's something I'm on a daily basis having to ensure my writers are paid for their work if they're going off to a literary festival. And people like B are so amazing to sort of set up kind of a system where now writers do in the main and should get paid when they perform at a festival. For a long time, it was sort of assumed that, you know, maybe it was part of the publishing process. Now you should be paid when you go to a festival, and all the good festivals do that. And so it's processes like that. It's valuing the written word. It's valuing people's time. It's valuing authors' time. I do think a new generation of people coming into publishing have really led that movement. And I think I'd also sort of say, read between the lines. If you have small imprints opening it up, if you sort of see that a publisher is kind of growing, don't always write to big agents, don't always write to big publishers, write to the smaller ones that, you know, sort of, because you might just have an opening. And if you have languages, if you speak 3 languages, if you highlight it, you know, maybe you should be doing a job as a scout. Maybe you should be working in rights. I mean, there are some fascinating jobs.
Sorry, Sarah, could you just explain for anyone in the audience who isn't aware of what a scout is, what a scout does?
Yeah, a scout. I mean, actually, before I could sort of started, I was just jotting down literally the hundreds of roles in book publishing that I think, you don't necessarily know about until you actually work in the industry. And I think rights and foreign rights is a fascinating area. It's where a book is already published in the English language, and foreign publishers obviously buy the translation rights. And Scouts is a fascinating area, I think, where you have these really sort of very well-read, formidable people who are basically scouting for the big foreign publishers to find the best books in the English language to translate. And you have it also increasingly, a very sort of big area, increasingly is sort of Scouts hunting for kind of the best works to make into TV and film. And so they are kind of, you know, have their ears to the ground, talking about books all the time, hearing what's coming up, hearing what might be exciting, a new book, and they report to their foreign publishers. So if you have just kind of graduated, if you've kind of got 2 languages, 3 languages, or if you're interested in the international scene, or if you read in a particular area, then you would be really well served to sort of work in that area. It doesn't mean that you can't go on and do other things if you want to, but audio is another area that's kind of really thriving at the moment. There are so many different roles that you can get your foot in the door and then crisscross go. And I do think there's a lot more movement than there used to be. It used to be very much you had to sort of stay in your lane. I did want to sort of actually mention Miss Lexia, Spread the Words, Come Up. Miss Lexia is amazing for sort of encouraging female writers. Black British Writers Guild is amazing for encouraging anyone who is kind of writing. There are just so many kind of organizations now supporting young publishers. Society of Young Publishers is amazing as well. So be encouraged by that, I think, but also knock on the door, you know, bring what you have. Anyone who has a degree, anyone who has a kind of a PhD, you are bringing great value to whomever you're going to work for at whatever level you enter, in my view.
Thank you. Although just to be clear, like most people who go into publishing don't have PhDs, right?
No, not at all, not at all. And in fact, actually, many publishers now, again, when I first started, generally you often did have a degree, but actually not always by any means. I mean, often people came from all sorts of different areas in different areas. So sales wasn't necessarily that you had a degree then. In fact, a lot of publishers are dropping any kind of pre-requirement for degrees. So not by it, you don't necessarily need that now, no.
Thank you. How about for the people who work at the festivals? Is that you know, is the world changing for them? Is the industry changing?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I would say that I do definitely agree with Sarah about writers being paid, and I think, you know, I think it was maybe Sana saying about what your ethics and morals might be about thinking about going into a role. And for me, that would definitely be a red line around whether a festival paid their writers or not, and, you know, what the offer is to them. I think it's, I guess you know, in the work that I do, I would call myself a literature programmer, in that I would curate a panel of writers to come together to talk about a particular subject, or I'd invite a particular writer in who had a new book out, or I'd put a lineup of poets together for a poetry evening at a festival or at a venue. But because sometimes that role remains very kind of clear in an organization, and other times it crosses over into the producer side of things. So when I've set myself up as freelance, I said that I am a programmer and a producer, because I know that for smaller organizations, sometimes what you'll be doing is you'll be curating a panel of speakers. You'll also be meeting them on the day, talking to the tech person about what microphones they might need to have. You know, you will definitely be feeding into the marketing campaign to get people to come and see the writers. You might be introducing them on stage. I think for some of the organisations I work for, that it's very clear cut that they're two separate roles. And for other smaller organisations, you end up doing a bit of both. So, you know, I guess I would say for the people who work at literature festivals and organisations and things, you sometimes do have to be a little bit open to the way that roles might shift and change depending on the size of and the requirements of what you're doing. You know, in an ideal world, every organisation would be so well resourced that they, you know, could have really clearly defined roles. But I think that lots of people working in the arts industry are used to kind of, you know, because they care so much about making really brilliant events, they will kind of do what they can to make it a really brilliant event. I'm not always saying that that's right, that you end up doing more than your role defines. But, you know, I've just finished working on a Women of the World festival this weekend, which has lots of different writers and panel discussions and things. And it, you know, it is such a fantastic time to be working on literature festivals where there are, you know, they're much more diverse. There are so many incredible writers today. I would say that you just have a really great time, and they, you know, they can be very stressful, but there can be a lot of pressure for them. But people are excited about hearing people speak about things that they care about. They love seeing their favorite writers. It's a really fantastic atmosphere to be involved in. So yeah, I would say it's a good time to work at festivals.
Thank you very much. I'm conscious that questions are piling up in the Q&A, and I will turn to those very soon. Just before I do, Sana, I wanted to ask you about, well, both as an editor and as a writer of reviews and sort of, I don't know, literary journalism. I don't know if that's how you think of it, but if you had any advice to people who wanted to get into that about how to approach editors, how to get commissioned, what you as an editor are looking for, etc.
I think, yeah, it's something I'm still trying to figure out. I think I'm constantly sort of trying to, you know, who do I pitch to and how? Like, I think that's a big question. I think at Wasafiri specifically, like, you know, we publish creative and critical work. So we publish academic articles, we publish interviews, reviews, a whole range of things. We have a submissions window, which is, it's always good to look out for submissions windows at various literary magazines. We have an annual new writing prize for fiction, life writing, and poetry. These are really kind of, I think, reading what a literary magazine publishes. I think, you know, reading magazines, reading widely, to get a sense of the kind of material they publish, and then making sure that, like, you're pitching to the place that's right for you, as opposed to an organization or a magazine that feels like it's, you know, popular or will grant you exposure, or you know, pay, or everyone's writing for X magazine, therefore I should too. I read a really incredible essay, I think recently, by Nosh Sabah, who founded Poetry Birmingham Literary Journal, about, you know, not just pitching for the sake of it, but really kind of figuring out why it is that you want to write that particular piece for that particular magazine, and how that kind of works for you. I think just going back to that question of paying authors as well, there's this impression, and I think Sarah mentioned this earlier as well, about internships and kind of, you know, making sure that they're paid. You know, there's this, I guess, this feeling that, you know, this word exposure, or, like, you know, write for somewhere, work for somewhere, do this, like, yeah, but it will start your career, it will, like, lead to exposure. And I think it's something that writers of color in particular, or like marginalized voices, like, I think that's something that kind of, like, that word hangs over our heads a lot more, just because you want to try to kind of break into the industry, you don't see always, like, enough voices like yours. So I think it's important to kind of think about that, and think about your own I guess security, and, you know, what's right for you. But also, Wasafiri is an Arts Council England funded organization. A lot of these small organizations that we're talking about, you know, are funded by ACE or, you know, are chronically underfunded in lots of cases. And they're trying very hard to kind of, you know, make sure they do right by authors. And, you know, still, you know, we're a very small team who all work part-time, for example. But I think there needs to be more conversation between like these like small organizations and kind of on what we think of as like the mainstream. I think, you know, there's been a lot recently about like, you know, the first book from an Indian language to win the Booker, or the first Black British writer. And this idea of first, like, it's a little bit troubling, because I think we have to stop like patting ourselves on the back so much and kind of think about the work that's still to be done. And it's about that longevity and like, you know, sustaining that, you know, like 5 years later, if I'm seeing enough books translated from Indian languages on the International Booker Prize longlist, then I'm going to think that means something. But these one-offs, these exceptions, I think I've gone totally off your question, by the way. But yeah, I think I'm sorry, I've lost track now. But I think it's important to think about where you're pitching to and why is the short answer.
Thank you very much. That was very valuable and thematically relevant and resonant. Thank you. I think we should turn to the questions because we've from the audience, because we've got quite a few of them now. So I will begin with this question from Misty, which is, I have a literature undergraduate degree and currently work as an English teacher. I've been trying to break into publishing for 2 years and so far haven't had much luck. I've had interviews at Pluto Press, but always told I need more experience. I'm considering a publishing all literature masters, but I'm unsure on what the next best step is. Sarah, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think it's very difficult to be told you don't have enough experience when you're going for an entry-level job. And what I would say is I would persevere. I think one of the resources that you'll be supplied with afterwards is do sign up for the bookseller bulletins, do sign up for Book Branch Bulletin, do read between the lines, keep going. There are actually at the moment quite a lot of entry-level jobs going. If you feel that you just can't bear to apply for any more at this moment, then go and do another degree. As I say, everything I feel that you do contributes to what you're going to offer. And I think you've maybe been unlucky. I think you have to keep going. It's not easy. I'm not saying that it's easy to enter this industry or any industry. But if you really want to do it, maybe try some different jobs, some different roles, some different publishers. Don't be put off by that kind of, how are you going to have experience until you get experience? If you feel it kind of will just give you that bit of advantage, go and do it, because you may well end up sort of getting more connections, meeting more people. And I think you really work on that, because as I say, go to London Book Fair, go to the seminars, go and see some of these publishers. They're all there to talk to you, and it's really important that you recognize that. So try and see how you can shift the ground a bit. It sounds to me like you've been unlucky. Maybe you should consider wider possibilities. Maybe you're going for particular jobs that you're not as suited for as others. That's what I would say. If you're determined, you will get there, I think.
There was a question here about the London Book Fair, actually, which is it open to everyone, including students? I assume from what you're saying that it is.
It's definitely open to everyone. You can buy a visitor's day pass. I was trying to look up how much it is, but it's manageable, and there will be, I'm sure, a student discount. And you can go for the day, and there are hundreds of seminars. There's every single sort of publisher. It's a kind of what I find incredibly exciting about it. And I think for some of your students that sort of are watching this, or anyone who's watching this, you go there, and for me, every year it's just like this. You have this real sense of the publishing world from all around the world. You've got literally people, I mean, it's absolutely fascinating, and you've got people who've traveled far, all fascinated by the written word. So you'll have kind of obviously a whole kind of hangar room of sort of foreign publishers. You'll have all the UK, the US publishers, but you'll have people there who are right across the industry, from sort of printing, from contracts, from translations to as I say, all the major publishers, all the smaller publishers. So you get this sort of sense of how many jobs and how many roles are there. And I think it's really useful. And absolutely it is for everyone. You can talk to people. You go up and you talk to people. That is why they're there.
Thank you very much, Sarah. There's an excellent question here for everyone, which is, how is the work-life balance in your line of work?
Yeah, so that's why I said earlier, yeah, it does feel like I'm working 6 days a week, which because generally I am. Yeah, I try and keep Saturday as a non-laptop day with greater or lesser degrees of success. But yeah, I'm in the fortunate position that I've been able to reduce the commercial work down to 4 days a week. And I spend that over at a branding agency in Sloane Square. And then, yeah, the rest of the time is doing everything else. And so trying to squeeze in my own writing. And so right now, yeah, my head is just full of signing off proofs and, you know, getting the marketing all together for book 3, which is, yeah, coming very, very soon. But also the other stuff that surrounds it. So full disclosure, I'm a trustee at Wasafiri, so so the work that involves, which isn't literary but far more of the admin and organizational effort that needs to go into keeping an organization like Wasafiri on the road. And so those sorts of things as well. There will be sometimes absolutely when I will get in at 6 and then I've got to try and bash out 500 words for someone by the night is done. But I wouldn't do it, and you shouldn't do it unless ultimately it's fun, right? And sad chap that I am, that I do get fun out of doing it, and remembering that that it is that, and the fact that you can lean into the chance to say yes to things that would have never happened. I think that's the other thing to bear in mind, even when there are particular pinch points or painful points in a project. Ultimately the end result should be worth it. If I just give you an example, so last year, back in January, I just started at the place that I'm currently at. And we were producing a film, and the client saw it and said, we'd like to run it at the Super Bowl. And so suddenly, and they gave us about 10 days notice. And for those of you who don't know, the Super Bowl is America's biggest sporting event, but also America's great festival of commercials. And so running an advert in that is a big deal. And so I'm suddenly having to rewrite the script multiple times to have it signed off by the lawyers in Philadelphia. And all the while that I'm doing that, I have a deadline for The Guardian, hoving into view at the same time. And so I'm frantically running between, rewriting this script and then making sure that, I'm polishing that review and so on and so on. And, I'm sure I was a nightmare to live with that particular week, but, it gets done. And then you can say, okay, managed to do both. But possibly don't ask me to do that again in a hurry, shall we say. But the outcome was good.
Thank you. Sana, how is your work-life balance?
It's I think it's whatever it is, it's self-inflicted, like Rishi said. But I think it's about, I think you decide for yourself what works for you. So you either want to kind of immerse yourself in one, full-time job that's 9 to 5, 5 days a week, and you do that. Or like me, you like to do kind of multiple part-time roles and kind of switch from one thing to the other. I spend kind of, a substantial amount of my week working at Wasafiri, and then the other times I'm kind of also writing reviews, meeting those deadlines, etc. I try to kind of have a more sort of healthy sort of balance, and I attempt to do those things, and there will be points at which it's 1 month and I'm like, oh, this is the first time I'm reading a book just to read it, and yay for me. But I enjoy it. And, I wouldn't do it any other way. I think it's about finding what that kind of, I guess, like, I hate the word like phrase self-care, but like it's about being mindful of that and like finding what works for you. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that's a question which we should perhaps come on to, about whether your relationship with reading has been changed for the better or for the worse by your job. But meanwhile, B, how's your work-life balance?
Well, I sort of think it's been quite strange actually, because basically the pandemic did change a lot of things for me. So, I was working at South Bank Centre, which is, I think, the biggest art centre in Europe. It's, it was an incredibly demanding job. I did some of the most amazing things I will ever do in my life there. But I also regularly worked on festivals that were 14 days long for 14 hours a day, and ate a sandwich from M&S at 11:30 at night on the tube home every night. And I did that for years actually, and then the pandemic happened and everything changed, and I became freelance, and I now balance several different freelance jobs. I work mainly from home, but I sometimes go into offices so that I get a bit of human contact. But my life is really different now. I get to walk my dog on Walthamstow marshes every day. I get to spend more time at home, closer to home, which is something that I have not done for many years because I was spending so much time on a commute into central London. So yeah, things have really changed for me. There are obviously pinch points. So when I'm working on a festival, the few weeks running up to the festival and the festival itself will be very, very busy. And I think one other thing to say is that and Sana, I don't know if you find this as well, but when you're sort of trying to manage lots of different freelance contracts or roles, you have to kind of be a bit strict with yourself, because sometimes I'm not very good at doing this, and sometimes I find myself saying, I work for you on a Tuesday, but then I'll check my emails on a Wednesday and Thursday, and then the person I'm working for thinks, oh great, she's available. I think you do have to be quite strict with yourself if you're trying to balance lots of different roles and try and stick to that. And then, in the long run, it means that whoever you're working with will respect that. And it does, it means that it's a better working environment, but that's definitely something I'm still learning.
Thank you. Sarah, I know that you've mentioned your love of the written word several times. It must get tested sometimes, though. I mean, you must have so much to read. It must be overwhelming.
Sorry, yes. Yeah, I mean, I probably read about, I probably have about sort of 50 to 70 submissions a week. So I'm constantly reading. I'm sort of, as is sort of everyone in book publishing, I suppose. I think it's interesting during pandemic. I think a lot of people found it harder to read, and then actually ultimately a lot of people started coming back to books in a way because there was so much coming at them sort of through sort of TV and film and so forth. But it is interesting how reading, I suppose I differentiate between sort of reading kind of submissions and reading books that sort of in my personal life, but obviously that's part of it as well, because you're keeping up with everything. You're sort of wanting to read your favorite authors and new books, and I found it, something I found quite interesting is that sort of my reading times have changed. And again, I don't know if that's sort of COVID. So I used to read a lot sort of later in the evening, and I often find now that I wake up and read for enjoyment quite early in the morning, which has really interested me. So, but obviously, because it's what I do for a living, it's something that, is you have to manage your time quite well when you're reading. I want to be in the best framework for when I'm reading. If I'm editing, it's really important that I come to a manuscript and I'm not, kind of sort of overly tired, so you have to, as everyone's saying, you have to sort of manage your time and your reading your reading patterns, I think, is sort of quite important too. And as for work-life balance, yes, that is a constant thing for everyone, but I think it's also very hard in a contemporary world. Everyone is it seems to me, spinning a lot of plates and underfunded often, I think. I mean, thank goodness for thank goodness for Arts Council England, thank goodness for the Royal Society of Literature, for all of these sort of supporting agencies, as it were, because they're really crucial, I think, in the contemporary publishing world, to writers and to publishers and to people sort of for helping keep the industry thriving, I feel.
Thank you. There's a question from Ella Parry-Davis. Do you see any trends emerging in the sector that students hoping to enter it in the next couple of years should watch out for? Sana, could we begin with you?
I think the trends like really interesting. I think these like waves, I think when kind of everyone is like excited about a particular topic or something like that. But I think it's the more kind of the stuff that's like long lasting that I'm like kind of like a bit more interested in. But having said that, like I think translation is really, really big in the UK at the moment. So translation presses, the work that English Pen are doing, in kind of, awarding like little grants and like supporting sample translations and things like that. I think that's really, really vital. I would say podcasting, literature, like, so I think just kind of like speaking like to something that's like getting the kind of feeling of sort of being a bit more like intimate space with the authors you love and the books that they write. Like I think podcasting, like literature festivals, gives you that kind of alternate kind of like way of like consuming literature if you're pressed for time, if you're on your commuting and things like that. I would definitely say like translations and podcasts, literature podcasts, I think quite big at the moment, and there's lots of exciting ways in which to kind of enter those sectors. Yeah.
Thank you very much. B, what are your thoughts on that? Are there any particular trends that you see emerging in the coming years? Perhaps not developing.
Well, that's a really hard question. I mean, I think I agree with Sana really that, you do see trends, and, the last sort of 5 years, there's been a huge drive to publish more Black and Asian writers. But if we don't see that continuing, that can't just be a fad or a trend, that must continue, and that must just become the norm for the publishing world, and I hope that it will. I think, I do feel a certain sense of responsibility, because the role that I do, there's a certain sense of gatekeeping around it. I sort of decide what goes on stage out of everything that is pitched to me. So I must keep up with all of the different writers that are putting out amazing work, different literature initiatives that are coming up that might not ordinarily find their way onto a festival stage. I've seen a lot more around the climate emergency recently, and saw a great speaker over the weekend, Michaela Loach, who is a sort of young climate activist, who's just like brilliant and fun and dynamic, and she is the sort of person who will take younger, older people along with her. So I think dynamic younger writers who are looking at lots of different issues that are incredibly important to them, and I suppose, of course, the climate emergency is right up there.
Thank you. Rishi, I'm going to slightly edit the question, but what changes do you see to the like poetry publishing?
It's actually a thing that's broader than the poetry, and it is, to my mind, hopefully will be a substantive change, and we've touched on it earlier, which is the rise of the indies, for want of a better phrase. And I'm sure there might be some people in the room who are like au fait with, what happened in in punk and new wave in the late 70s and early 80s, and I feel and see lots of parallels between the explosion of activity and creativity that was happening in British independent music around then, and similarly across British publishing, certainly over the last 5-10 years or so. And so it's really I guess a plea, a suggestion that don't think of of something like the big houses as the only places where you can make a successful career. And it's now not just theoretically possible, it's actually possible to shift the terms of the literary debate. It's possible to win prizes, be nominated, it's possible to get lots of press coverage, it's possible to shift books at places that are potentially might have been outside the mainstream, coming from the margins, however you want to describe it, right? And they're great places to be a pirate, right, and start to make up your own rules. And if you've got a strong aesthetic bent, if you are coming from a particular political position or a particular viewpoint, right, it not just finding somewhere to work, but actually maybe even actually doing it yourself, and that ethos, right? There's a lot of to stretch a parallel, a lot of reason why many of us write is that because we can't find the writers who are getting close to what's in our heads, and so we have to get it out onto the page, right? Similar thing, if you can't find the books that you want to read, or you're thinking, hang on, there's a perspective that I've got that isn't being shared. I know there are people out there who share this perspective because we're talking about it down the pub on Friday night. We're having these conversations in our Discords or whatever. It's now more than possible for you to go out and correct that and change that and intervene and make a mark, right? So, be bold and be ambitious in that way. You've got, I'm not going to quite go as far as say, you can seize the means of production, but you're not far off, right? so be brave, I think.
Thank you very much. Sarah, seizing the means of production, is that what you'd encourage people to do? I mean, you mentioned the rise of the indies, but the sort of the enormous diversity of small presses, both for fiction and poetry and non-fiction that there are at the moment. Do you work with them a lot as an agent? I mean, are you selling to these small houses?
Well, absolutely. And the independents are doing have an extraordinary role really now. And by lots of accounts are sort of doing too much of the heavy lifting, I think, is how many of them feel, and rightly so. And I think what's very interesting that sort of as an agent for your writer, in terms of one of the really big things that a writer needs to sort of be put in for is prizes. So it is very exciting how many smaller independent publishers there are, and actually really impressive people. I mean, I think you're absolutely right, Rishi. It's sort of got a real sort of punk sense to it, kind of like, it's not out there, it's not being published for me, we're going to go and do it ourselves. And I think that's why sort of at the outset I keep coming back to, I think it's a really exciting time to enter publishing. And it's never going to be hard, it's never going to be easy, I understand that, but I'm really encouraged by all these really strong authoritative writers and voices coming into publishing who've maybe had academic careers, who've kind of maybe want to publish and write. Social media's allowed that in a way that really it just wasn't possible when I first entered publishing. It just wasn't. And so, yes, I think you have, I mean, again, to mention sort of influx, Percival Everett, bringing him to the market here, they've done a sort of phenomenal job, and as have many. And I do absolutely do deals with smaller publishers, because I want my authors to be published and by editors who really engage with their work. So just this week, for example, I've done my second deal with this wonderful Scottish publisher, Luna Press Publishing, who publish in sort of science fiction, fantasy area. and they did a superb job with one of my authors, Nikhil Singh, and got Publishing Scotland involved, and he was shortlisted for Best Novel at the BSFA Awards and Best Cover by Ruby Gloom, who kind of, sort of added this whole sort of dynamic to the cover and so forth. And I've also just done a deal with Beachy Books that was awarded this year, as this was just announced this week, who are independent IPG independent publisher, and they have bought a novel all about the Victorians in the Isle of Wight, and obviously have that kind of connection to the Isle of Wight. So, and already are kind of involved in sort of working out how they're going to publish, how they're going to sort of broaden from a sort of small standpoint. And that's really exciting. It has to be a range. I mean, on the other end of the scale, I have kind of authors who do very big deals with very big publishers. So it has to be a range. I'm wanting my authors to be published in the best possible way that they can be. What I think is also interesting is that, I mean, I spoke to an author last year who we were talking about working together, and they're an author who publishes incredibly successfully, self-publishes, to the degree where kind of they have to look at the publishing world and sort of think, well, what can they do for me? I'm earning money, I'm kind of publishing very successfully, I can do amazing covers, I can kind of get professional work done on my book. What can and that was a very interesting moment. It was a kind of, actually, what does the traditional publishing world offer you if you are already getting that level of sales and earnings? So there are ways of navigating things. I mean, I know lots of authors who are sort of increasingly keeping some backlist if it's kind of reverted. They're actually keeping it in print by a form of self-publishing, which is basically promoting their own work once those rights come back and earning from it. So I think there's just so many different elements that are kind of very different from when I first entered the industry, and it really encourages me. I'm excited by that. And I think Rishi's absolutely right, that kind of put it out there yourself, kind of, and I suppose that's what I'm trying to get across, of kind of work out what you want to do, what you can offer, and rap on the door and just say, look, I do this, I can bring this to the sort of proverbial publishing party sort of thing. And I think that really excites me. It really excites me.
Thank you very much. I think we're going to have to end on that wonderful, optimistic thanks to Lily Blaxell at the Royal Society of Literature and Ellie Perry-Davis at King's for all their hard work in putting this event together. And please, well, can't see an audience, but I will applaud our wonderful panel. Thank you so much. I'm sorry if you're in the audience and you asked a question which I didn't get round to. I apologise for that, but there were too many to do justice to all of them. Thank you.